Christian Heroes Then and Now. Eric Liddell. Something Greater Than Gold. Janet and Geoff Benge. Chapter 2, Going Home. 4-year-old Eric Liddell had a wonderful life. He lived at a large London Missionary Society compound in Chang on the Great Plain of North China. Eric, along with his 6-year-old brother, Robert, and Jenny, his 3-year-old sister, had free run of the place. There were 4 large houses inside the compound walls, plus 2 schools, one for boys and one for girls, and a church. Eric's father, James Liddell, preached in the church, and his mother, Mary, helped teach school. As a nurse, Eric's mother also took care of many of the local children when they were sick. Sometimes visitors to the Chang compound thought little Eric was a Chinese boy. Eric dressed in a blue padded jacket and pants, like the rest of the village children, and he chatted away to his friends in perfect Chinese. But when he took his cap off, it was obvious he wasn't Chinese. Despite his local dress, he had straight blonde hair and big blue eyes. "The laddie has fair Scottish coloring," his mother would tell visitors as she patted Eric on the head and sent him back outside to play with his friends or his pet goat. Eric often heard his parents talk about the hills of bonny Scotland, and he tried to imagine what the country would be like. His mother said it never got too cold or too hot in Scotland, unlike China, where it fell below freezing in winter and soared to 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. She also told Eric of huge areas there, as far as a person could see, with not a house or farm in sight. Eric found this hard to believe, especially when he clambered up on top of the 6-foot-high mud wall that surrounded the mission compound. The Great Plain of North China surrounded Chang, and across the plain lived 10 million people in 10,000 villages dotted close together. Stretched between the villages was an almost endless patchwork of wheat and millet fields, divided by snaking muddy streams and waterways that had been used for centuries to irrigate the land. Eric couldn't look anywhere around this landscape and not see people, houses, and farms. It was the only landscape he had known in his young life, and it was very hard for him to imagine anything else. Eric's parents had come to China before Eric was born. James Liddell arrived in China as a missionary in 1898, and soon afterwards, his fiancée, Mary, joined him there. The two were married in Shanghai in 1899 and then sent by the London Missionary Society, LMS, to work in Mongolia. Soon after arriving in Mongolia, though, a terrible rebellion broke out in China. A group of men calling themselves the League of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, or Boxers for short, stirred up hatred among the Chinese people toward all foreigners. The Boxers believed that they possessed magical powers. They thought that their bodies could stop bullets and cannonballs, and that they could ward off sword blows with their bare arms. Many of the uneducated peasants in China believed the Boxers and were terrified of them. The Boxer Rebellion erupted in June 1900. Chinese people were encouraged to rise up and kill all the foreigners who had humiliated their country for so long. The Boxers especially wanted foreign missionaries killed because they were bringing another religion to the people of China. Many people did join the Boxers and killed missionaries, along with many Chinese Christians. The Boxer Rebellion started when the German ambassador to Peking was assassinated. By the time it was finally put down by a combined force of 20,000 foreign troops, 200 missionaries, including women and children, and over 30,000 Chinese Christians had been killed. Mongolia was one of the first places the Boxers attacked. James Liddell had fled the mission station there with Mary, who was expecting their first child. The couple had left all their belongings behind except for a small suitcase of clothes. In fear for their lives at every turn, they made the long and tortuous journey south several hundred miles to Shanghai. There they waited at the LMS compound before moving on to Tientsin. While waiting for the rebellion to die down, James Liddell traveled back to Mongolia to see what had become of the mission and the Chinese Christians he had been forced to leave behind. He found the mission station destroyed and the local Christians in hiding. The area still wasn't safe for missionaries to return to. When James Liddell reported his findings to the London Missionary Society, the society sent the Liddells to one of its established mission centers in Xiaochang, a small village in the central area of the Great Plain. By then, the couple had 2 sons. On January 16, 1902, 18 months after the birth of her first son, Robert, Mary Liddell had given birth to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, dimple-chinned baby boy. The baby had been named Eric Henry Liddell. The baby was to have been called Henry Eric Liddell until a missionary friend pointed out that the initials spelled H-E-L. James Liddell quickly switched his new son's first names around. Even though the Boxer Rebellion had been put down, in many parts of China, feelings of hatred and anger towards foreigners still simmered below the surface. This was not the case in Xiaochang, however. The Chinese Christians who lived there were eager to welcome missionaries back. When Eric's parents arrived at the compound for the first time, a banner was hanging over the village gate. It read, Chung Wai Ai Chai, which James and Mary Liddell knew meant Chinese and foreigners, all one home. How glad the Liddells were to finally be somewhere safe. After James and Mary Liddell had been in China for 9 years, the London Missionary Society decided the family should return to Scotland for a year's break, or furlough, as it was officially called. We're going home, Robert yelled as he raced out the door into the courtyard where Eric and Jenny were playing with a new batch of kittens. Home? Questioned 5-year-old Eric. We are home. No, our other home, silly, to Scotland, replied his older and wiser brother, who had never actually been there. That afternoon, the Liddell family began to pack and prepare for their trip home. Several days later, the family made their way from Xiaochang to Tientsin, where they caught a boat to Shanghai. Eric had been with his family to the beach before, but he had never been on a boat. He stood in amazement and peered over the side until Tientsin disappeared completely from view. In Shanghai, they boarded a German steamer for the 6-week voyage from Shanghai to Southampton. After arriving in England, the family caught a train to London, where James and Mary Liddell met with the leaders of the London Missionary Society and gave them a detailed report of their work. Then they climbed aboard another train for the final leg of the trip home to Scotland. As the train rolled into Scotland, Eric's eyes grew big as he looked out the window. There was so much empty land. Sheep grazed among castle ruins, and the wide green valleys were dotted with small stone cottages. Everything delighted Eric. Scotland was so different from China, and so different from anything he had imagined. Finally, the train drew to a stop at the village of Dryman on the shores of Loch Lomond. James Liddell announced to his young son that they were finally home. Eric loved Dryman. His parents rented a house there, and he was able to explore the same places his father had explored as a child. Eric's grandfather owned a small grocery store in Dryman. It didn't take Eric long to figure out that he liked the aniseed balls, licorice, all sorts, and English toffees sold in the store. Grandfather Liddell also ran a side business transporting people and packages to and from the railway station. The village and the station were about a mile apart. Many times Eric would perch on top of the horse-drawn wagon with his grandfather, looking importantly down on the world as they rode to the station to meet the train. The year-long furlough in Dryman sped by, and at the end of it, Eric's mother had something important to tell her sons. The two boys would not be returning to China with the rest of the family. It was time for them to start their formal education in a proper English school. In 1908, it was normal for the children of missionaries to attend boarding schools in England while their parents served overseas in foreign countries. 6-year-old Eric clung to his brother as the two boys followed their mother up the steps and into the dreary stone administration building of London School for the Sons of Missionaries. In 1912, while Eric and Robert were still enrolled there, the school changed its name to Eltham College. The school had been started in 1842 by the London Missionary Society, and all of the 150 boys who attended it were sons of missionaries, just as the sign on the gate said. All going well, Robert and Eric would attend the school until they graduated and were ready for university. An hour after arriving, the boys had been outfitted with gray flannel shorts, jacket, tie, and cap, just like all the other students. Then they were shown to their beds at the end of a long row of narrow cots that ran the length of the upstairs dorm room. Beside each cot was a washstand that held a basin and water jug. The brothers were told to hang their things on the hook beside their cots and join the rest of the class for a cricket lesson on the back field. Mary Liddell slipped quietly away from the school while her boys were being introduced to the meaning of a wicket, a maiden over, and other details of cricket. It would be 7 years before Eric and Robert would see their mother again, and 13 years before they saw their father. After his carefree life in China and the wilds of the Scottish Highlands, Eric found it difficult to adjust to living in the gray stone building in London. He missed his parents, his younger sister Jenny, and the goats and the kittens he'd had in China. Since he was small for his age and very shy, Eric let Robert do the talking for them both. He would freeze with terror if someone asked him a question when Robert wasn't around. At school, every part of Eric and Robert's life, along with the lives of the other students, was organized by someone else. The students sat in long rows when eating their meals, with a schoolmaster looking on to make sure they used proper manners. The Liddell brothers missed Chinese food a lot. They were not used to eating the bread and dripping and bowl of gray oatmeal when they were served each morning for breakfast. Eric longed for a bowl of soya beans or millet. All of the boys in school marched into class in rows and sat without talking as their teacher read the day's lessons. After school, they all went to the study hall where they did their homework, once again sitting in rows. Each Thursday evening, they wrote letters to their parents under the supervision of one of the schoolmasters. All this work was hard for a young boy not used to attending school. As with most schools in the early 1900s, the hours of hard study went hand in hand with a lot of vigorous exercise. Sports were not something extra a boy might do for a hobby. They were a serious part of the school day. All the boys learned to play rugby in winter. In summer, they played cricket and competed in many track and field events. This emphasis on sports was meant to teach British boys how to play by rules, how to respect authority, and how to be part of a team. While Eric didn't find much joy in classwork, he enjoyed sports. In one of his letters to the family in China, 10-year-old Eric wrote, "I don't think much of lessons, but I can run." And so he could. Both Eric and Robert excelled at every sport they tried. Another activity all the students were expected to be part of was the school play. The drama teacher took great pride in presenting a play each year, and there was a lot of competition for the leading roles. Even the girls' parts were all played by the boys. One year, it was decided that the play would be Alice in Wonderland. Eric didn't want a leading role. In fact, he didn't want a role at all. It was agony for him to think of getting up in front of so many people. As it turned out, the drama teacher cast him as the Dormouse, a shy little creature with hardly a word to say. The part was just right for Eric, who did a wonderful job. Eric didn't even have to pretend to be shy. After the play, and until the time he left Eltham College at 19, his nickname was the Mouse. For summer holidays, the two boys would take the train to Dryman to stay with their grandfather. On shorter holidays, they either stayed at school or stayed with some of their friends. Eric would have liked to have been more involved in things at school, but he was just too shy. Once, there was a tennis match against a nearby girls' school, but Eric pulled out at the last minute. He couldn't imagine what he would say to a girl when he got to her school. There were also Bible studies the boys could attend if they chose. Eric liked to go along, but he always sat near the back so that he could make a quick exit if he were called upon to answer a question or make a comment. The years at school rolled by, with each new year not much different from the one before. That is, until 1914, when Eric was 12 years old. Two events happened that Eric would remember for the rest of his life. The first event was a happy one. Eric's mother gave birth to another baby boy, Ernest. Eric was eager to see his new little brother, and his mother promised to bring Ernest and Jenny to London for a few weeks' visit in 1915. The second event was a terrible and frightening one. A great war, which would eventually be known as the First World War, started in Europe. Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire were on one side, with France, Great Britain, and Russia on the other. Many of the senior boys at the school volunteered to fight for the British. Before they left for the battlefield, they proudly visited Eltham College in their new khaki uniforms, and each boy carried a modern short magazine Lee Enfield rifle. Within weeks, many of these new recruits had been killed on the battlefields of Flanders in France. Like the rest of the boys at school, Eric came to dread the daily assembly where the latest list of dead and injured old boys was read. It was not easy to listen to the names being read. These dead and wounded soldiers were not just names, they were people. Friends the boys had played cricket and rugby with, friends who had helped the younger boys in study hall. It was like losing one big brother after another, and it went on for 4 years. Sports, though, seemed to cheer Eric up. Like his older brother, Eric showed a lot of promise. By the time Robert had reached his senior year at Eltham College, Eric was his only real competition in sports. By 1918, when Eric was 16 and Robert was 18, the brothers were the two athletic stars of the school. The 1918 sports page in the school record book read as follows: first in cross country, high jump, and hurdling, Robert Liddell. First in long jump, 100-yard dash, and quarter-mile race, Eric Liddell. Where the one brother came in first, the other was always in second place. Not only that, Eric and Robert both played rugby for the first 15 and cricket for the first 11, the school's top teams in each sport. Robert and then Eric, was also made captain of most of the school sports teams. In 1918, just as Robert was old enough to consider signing up to fight, the First World War ended. That year, instead of going off to war, Robert left Eltham College for Edinburgh University to study to become a doctor. Edinburgh was located on the east coast of Scotland. For the first time in his life, Eric was alone, away from every member of his family. But he had little time to be lonely. He had to study for some difficult and important exams coming up at the end of the 1919 school year. And as usual, involvement in sports also kept him busy. Eric did well in both pursuits. He passed his exams and set a new school record of 10.2 seconds for the 100-yard sprint, a school record that to this day has not been broken. A year later, Eric left Eltham College and rode the train north to Edinburgh University. It was a very exciting time for him. His mother was coming home to Scotland, along with 17-year-old Jenny and 6-year-old Ernest. They would all live together again in Edinburgh, and Eric's father would join them there a year later. Finally, the whole family would be together again. Sure enough, in 1921, James Liddell returned to Scotland. Eric was 6 years old when he had last seen his father. After the two of them had caught up on each other's lives, James Liddell asked his son what he wanted to do once he finished studying for his degree in math and science. Eric had to confess that he wasn't too sure. Neither in his wildest dreams, though, could he have imagined that before he even graduated, he would be the most famous man in Scotland.